everyone, welcome back to 996. The Howl. After the All-Star break, it's time to talk about the trade deadline, who's moving out, what an exciting time it is this trade deadline than it was last year. Last year, Coyotes were pretty quiet. They really had nothing of value to trade. It was about exactly this time last year. They made probably the biggest trade at the trade deadline for the Coyotes, which was Lyubushkin for a second-round pick and Nick Ritchie, which I thought was an amazing trade at the beginning, right when it happened. Maybe Leafs fans thought they got out ahead of that trade, but Lyubushkin's not worth a second, and definitely not worth Nick Elite Sniper Ritchie. There was also some little bit of other trade. Johan Larsson for a third-round pick to Washington, Wedgwood for a third-round pick to Dallas. Both good trades. Larsson's not even in the NHL this season, so to get him for a third. Wedgwood, Dallas made the playoffs, so that fourth round turned into a third-round pick. And then the Coyotes actually bought a couple players too. They got Nathan Smith for a fourth round pick and Jack McBain for a second round pick. Maybe a bit expensive for McBain, but he's still young, still growing. Like him in the bottom six. Like that he's young and a grinder, so he has that energy every night and, sets up that tone for hockey games to be a grinding, heavy-hitting type line. So we'll see how that turns out. McBain's probably going to be with the Coyotes for another couple of years once he's signed next season, I believe. So, the jury's not out on whether that was a bad trade for the Coyotes, but right now maybe a little bit more expensive. But this trade deadline, the Coyotes have actual value to trade, and probably the biggest name on the trade market, I would say in terms of defensemen. I know Timo Meier's probably the biggest name for forwards. People saying Larkin might get traded. But for defensemen, it's Chychrun. Great value, great defenseman, great two-way defenseman. Any team would love this guy for the playoffs. And to boot, you get him for 3 playoff runs. That's what's different. He's not a rental. You get him for this playoff season, and he's got 2 more years on his contract after this season. So that's 3 playoff runs. I think the price Bill Armstrong has set for Chychrun is perfect. People think it's too expensive, but they don't realize it's 3 playoff runs. He's great defensively. He's not a liability. He's good offensively. He could be great on a power play. He's engaged. He's a competitor. Plays on the edge. Could lay some hits. He's just a great defenseman. He's not a guy that checks out. He really wants to be on a playoff contender. And I think he's a big get for teams like Toronto and Edmonton. I think they should do whatever they can to get a player like Chychrun. They would help them out tremendously. And then, teams like Pittsburgh and Washington could use another great defenseman on their back end for one of their power play units. Whoever's their top, D-man on their power play units now. Maybe Chychrun could rival them or compete for them for that spot, or he'll be a great option on PP2. But yeah, he's got 5 goals, 20 assists, 25 points in only 34 games played. Yes, his pacing and point production has decreased probably in the past couple weeks, but every Coyotes player has had a rough couple weeks. They finally got out of that, I think it was a 9-game regulation loss streak. So it was a bad time for most Coyotes players, which is why, his points clip isn't as high as it was, let's say, a month ago or when I made that Jacob Chychrun video. Like I said, he's got 3 more years. Obviously, this year's a half year. Doesn't count as a full year. $4.6 million. And that's probably the hardest part about this trade deadline is that like 90% of the teams in the playoff race don't have any cap space or it's under $1 million. In fact, there's so many teams with literally 0 cap space. So some moves are going to have to happen as well if Chychrun's going to go to a top contending team like, let's say, Toronto or Edmonton. The teams that are above $1 million in cap space that are in the playoff hunt, the Rangers at $1.2 million, they're probably looking for a forward. Winnipeg with $2 million. I can see Winnipeg, could make a move for Chychrun. Winnipeg's not known for making big splashes at the trade deadline or in free agency. I think one of their biggest trades ever was a Line for Dubois trade, which was uncharacteristic of a blockbuster for Winnipeg to do. Plus, I don't think Chychrun would want to go to Winnipeg, but they're surprising a lot of people this year. I didn't expect Winnipeg to be so good, but they got the cap space, $2 million. If the Coyotes retain or maybe just take one, maybe bad contract back from Winnipeg, it could work. And then you have Buffalo, who's not, really in a playoff spot right now, but they could contend. They got like a lot of cap space, but I don't see them buying. Could happen. But maybe this year they don't go straight into buying mode. They wait another year. And then Seattle, $1.1 million. So if they want to acquire a guy like Chychrun, they would have to move money out as well. So Chychrun's the number one get for the Coyotes, and pretty much of all defensemen in the league. He's on the Coyotes. Should be an interesting deadline for the Coyotes compared to last season. Then you have another defenseman. Let's say you don't want Chychrun for whatever reason. You want Gostisbehere, which if you're looking at to acquire Gostisbehere, just go and get Chychrun instead. He's the better defenseman. You get him for 3 playoff runs. Gostisbehere, you're only getting him for this playoff run. He's a bit more one-dimensional than Chychrun. I heard rumors swirling that Edmonton was interested in Gostisbehere. Just go and get Chychrun for the sake of McDavid. If you're going to acquire Gostisbehere, just instead go for number 6 in Chychrun. 9 goals, 20 assists, 29 points in 48 games played. Pretty much the same contract as Chychrun in terms of dollar value. $4.5 million for only 1 year. So technically a half year, just 1 playoff run. Gostisbehere, I think he's going to get a first-round pick. He should get a first-round pick. Anything less than that, I think Bill Armstrong might have lost a trade. He could be a power play quarterback. He's a great offensive defenseman. He's got his career back on track. Last season, he was good. This season, the same pace, so it wasn't a fluke. He's back to his self and offensive type defenseman. The only wrinkle is that he is injured until the trade deadline or shortly after the trade deadline. I don't think that's going to hurt his value. GMs know who Gostisbehere is. It was, like I said, it wasn't a fluke last year. He's back to being a top offensive defenseman. He led the Coyotes' defensive output when Chychrun was injured last year and parts of this year. So Gostisbehere could be a great add to teams like I already mentioned, like Washington, Pittsburgh. I wouldn't say he's a great add for Edmonton and Toronto because, again, they don't need more offense. It's best to get a more competitive edge all-around two-way guy who plays hard and could keep pucks out of your net and into the opposing net. So if you're Edmonton and Toronto, go for Chychrun first. And then you have Bukestad. Picked up in the offseason for $900,000. He's tied for third on the Coyotes in goals. He's got 11 goals, 10 assists, 21 points, 50 games played. I expect a third. I would be happy with a second-round pick. But, Bukestad's the type of guy, he could fit anywhere. Third-line center, fourth-line center. Even if your top 6, if something, drastically happens to one of your top 2 centers, which I doubt will happen. But pretty good on faceoffs, about 47.5%. He was playing in our top 6 alongside Krause and Michelli. That line was amazing. Really helped solidify some supplementary and secondary scoring aside from our top line. I think a lot of teams will love Bukestad. He's big. He competes. He could be physical. He's a face-off guy. Fits in well in your fourth-line center and third-line center. Let's say you're a playoff team. You have sort of maybe a rookie in your fourth-line center spot. He would be a big upgrade for that. Not looking for a first-round pick for him. Second or third-round pick, I think, would be good for that. Chychrun's price right now is either 2 first-round picks or a first-round pick and an A-tier prospect. Let's say we're talking about Toronto. Matthew Knees would be that top-level prospect. So you're looking at a first-round pick this year and Matthew Knees, maybe some other players to throw in if retention's involved and if players are coming back to the Coyotes to create cap space. But for him, for Chychrun, it's 2 firsts or a first and a top prospect. And then we go into, the biggest aspect and asset for the Coyotes is the cap space. $18.25 million in cap space. Next year's going to be a struggle to hit the cap floor. They're losing the $5.5 million of Andrew Ladd. If Chychrun and Gostisbehere get traded, that's about $9 million there. So they're going to have to spend or acquire some dead cap, which will help them reach the cap floor. There's not too many raises on the horizon for the Coyotes next season. Only Fisher and Michelli need contracts. I don't think Michelle's going to get raised so high unless they want to lock him in for 8 years. Maybe it'll be like a 4 or 5, but I think it'll be a smaller $1.5 million, maybe $2 million for Michelli. He's only had this season as his really breakout season. Maybe it'll be smart for management to wait and see if Michelli could do that again next season and see what out of our pipeline, our prospect pipeline, could come in and battle for Michelli's spot in the lineup. That's a different topic for a different video. But the main thing is no one's getting big raises for the Coyotes. They're losing a lot of money next season. They got to reach the cap floor. So some of these, there's only like 2 of these guys with 2 years left. So most of these guys are only for this season's cap hit. So if they're trading 2 of these players, they will need, that trading partner will need to give them some cap back next season. In the offseason, I'll look at, dead cap, longer term contracts that Coyotes should acquire to reach the cap floor. Because I don't see them spending in the free agency market. I don't see the Coyotes going out and getting O'Reilly or Dylan Larkin. It's too soon. They got to be more patient, and they're still in that developmental mode, not in a buying mode to compete for a playoff spot. So let's get into this long list. We got Hornquist in Florida making $5.3 million. That's a lot of money. I'm sure Florida, he's injured right now. Yes, he is injured right now. So, that's a roster spot and money being taken up. Florida, they're in a battle. I don't even think they might make the playoffs, but they're in a battle. Maybe that extra piece could put them over the edge, so they would trade away Hornquist to the Coyotes. Maybe not for Gostisbehere Chychrun, but trade the dead cap to the Coyotes and acquire a player from another team with that created cap room. Then you got 2 Toronto guys in Justin Howl, who's a defenseman, and Kerfoot, who's a forward. Kerfoot has fallen out of Toronto. He's getting paid way too much for the production he produces. Justin Howl, he was a huge scapegoat for the Leafs at the beginning of the season, but I don't see his name being thrown around like he needs to go lately. I think Toronto is a good coach in terms of playing good team defense. They outperform their defensive capabilities more than on paper it suggests, but all these fans usually say Howl needs to go. $2 million for the rest of the season. Boston, Mike Riley, almost $2 million. That's a player they really don't need in their lineup. He's a defenseman as well. If the Coyotes do let go of these 2 players, they need more NHL defensive bodies. They shouldn't really take from the Roadrunners, even though the Roadrunners are struggling. I would like them to stay competitive and maybe try to compete for a playoff spot. And maybe get some NHL experience on the back end, because once these 2 guys go, it's basically just J.J. Moser and Valimaki remaining on the back end. So it's going to be a really young blue line and inexperienced blue line once these 2 guys go. And then New Jersey, they got Bernier, who's a goaltender, and Janssen, who's a forward playing in the minors right now. $4 million for Bernier. I don't know who gave him that contract, but that's a poor contract, and you're paying a goalie who's not even playing for you. They have Blackwood and Vanacek, so Bernier is not even playing, and he's getting $4 million. And then Janssen, a former Leaf, hasn't produced well in New Jersey. He's playing in the minors. So actually, Bernier is injured, and Janssen is in the minors. So again, guys could use some good offensive type minded forward to fill out that third line, because the third line is just miserable right now. They kind of have just like a bottom 6 of just total grinders who don't produce offense. So maybe going to next season or even finishing out this season, they get a little more offense in their forward core to score some goals and make games a little bit more interesting. Another former Leaf, Kapanen in Pittsburgh, hasn't produced well this season or last season, getting paid just over $3 million for 2 more years, so this year and next year. That's the type of player I can see the Coyotes getting, an offensive-minded, sort of young player who fell out of, love with the Pittsburgh Penguins, needs a new start. There's not too much pressure playing on the Coyotes as opposed to the Penguins. Penguins, they got a lot of talent in their top 6. Coyotes, not really. They could use a guy like Kapanen, see where how he fits in the lineup. He won't be like a dead weight anchor like a guy like Zach Cassian is. He'd actually be an upgrade for the Coyotes. Then, Hagelin still in the league. I haven't heard his name in so long. Still on Washington, making almost $3 million. Kudobin in Dallas. He's been rumored to leave. He doesn't play for Dallas. He's in the minors. He's making $2.2 million. So, another team where they're paying a goalie to not play for them, and they could use that money for something else to bolster up for the playoffs. Getting back to here, I only stopped at these three. I'm not going to put Krause there. I don't think Krause is getting traded. I'm not going to put Vejmelka. I don't think Vejmelka is getting traded either. Too early to sell on Vejmelka. However, I wouldn't be opposed to a first-round pick from Vejmelka. If someone offered a first, I would take it. But, to keep it concise, maybe a little bit more accurate, and not to spread rumors or speculation, I don't think Vejmelka and Krause are getting traded. If they do get traded, that's more off-season, more time to figure out money in and money out in the cap situation. For a trade deadline, Krause just signed a long-term contract. He's, an assistant captain or alternate captain. He's getting paraded around as the core of the Coyotes. So I don't think he gets traded, which is why he's not on the board. And Vejmelka, there's no reason for the Coyotes to trade him. It's not like he costs them a lot of money. He's a good goaltender to have in these trying times of a rebuild. He's not a complainer. He loves that he has an opportunity to play in the NHL. He doesn't get down on himself. He's not emotional on the ice. So he's a good goaltender to have in this situation the Coyotes are in. But like I said, if the LA Kings say, hey, I'll give you a first for him, I'll take that in a heartbeat. Getting back here, Donskoy. I wanted Donskoy when he became a free agent. I think he went to Colorado Avalanche. And then Avalanche lost him in the expansion draft to Seattle. Making $4 million for the rest of the year. He is injured as well. So Seattle, they finally find themselves in a good playoff spot. It's not a fluke. They're top three in the division. They could literally go out and get someone for $4 million if they get rid of Donskoy. So, trade a second round pick to the Coyotes along with Donskoy. Coyotes don't give up anything. Seattle goes out and gets a player who could play on their roster and immediately and make an impact. It's a win-win all around. And then we have Nolan Patrick in Vegas and Brossoit in Vegas. I still have Brossoit on the board. I had him on last trade deadline's bait, but even last trade deadline, he was the backup for Vegas. Now he's not even the backup for Vegas. He's in the minors. They have Thompson and Aiden Hill, former Coyote, as their goaltender tandem. So another goalie teams are paying, and they're not playing on that team. So I know the Coyotes have a lot of goaltenders right now in their system. They have obviously Vejmelka and Ingram on the Coyotes. Then you have Gillies, Prosvetov. They called up a guy, Parks. They have, I already said Gillies, Tendek playing some games for Tucson. So a lot of goalies. Maybe acquiring a goalie won't really work for the Coyotes because they have too many, and goalies don't want to sit on the bench or in the press box. So maybe some movement will need to happen. Maybe Parks and Tendek go back to the East Coast Hockey League, and they could add one more goalie in Tucson. And then Fogle and Mike Smith is a mean pick. That's funny. It won't happen. It'd be pretty weird that Mike Smith gets traded back to the Coyotes. He doesn't play. He's injured. Hasn't played this season for Edmonton. Warren Fogle, he's fallen out of love with the Edmonton Oilers. He's not on their lineup. He doesn't really produce. There's other players producing better than him. He could be a player that Edmonton sends back to the Coyotes if they do go for a guy like Chychrun. And he's making almost $3 million for the rest of this season. So expect the Coyotes to get a cap dump. They would need to take on a bad contract in order to trade Chychrun to a contender, because these contenders have no cap space other than, like I said, maybe Winnipeg with $2 million. So it should be an interesting trade deadline. It should be heating up. It's starting to percolate. The speculation that Chychrun unfollowed and took away all Arizona mentions in his social media. I don't care for any of that social media stuff. I don't put any, gold to that or standard or put any weight to social media shenanigans. We saw that with Jacob Verana. He removed all Detroit, mentions in his social media, stopped following them, changed his pictures. Everyone speculated he was going to get traded. The hockey guy was thought for sure he'd get traded. Nothing happened. He went to the American Hockey League and he's still playing there. So I don't pay attention to speculation. I don't like speculation. Don't like rumors. The Horvat trade, maybe try to jumpstart the trade deadline movement. The Sharks just traded a player so they could get more contract room to acquire more contracts in a trade for Timo Meier because, like Chychrun, any team that wants Meier would need to send a bad contract back. So Sharks needed room there. The Coyotes, they have room for contract space. They do have contract space, so they don't need to make any minor trades to free up room. They could acquire 2 or 3 players. So it should be interesting. It is sad. These might be the last days of Chychrun. We already pretty much saw the last game of Gostisbehere because he's injured. So just interested to see what the return is on Chychrun and if it even happens. It's going to be tough. Bill Armstrong has his set price. He didn't budge on the packages for OEL, Garland, Dvorak, or Kemper. He set his price, and the price was met. He doesn't usually waver and really sell low, but recently that Timmins trade, I would say, was, he traded low on Timmins. But that's a rare occurrence. Not even sure what happened there. No journalist likes to even push on Bill Armstrong as to ask him why he made that trade. But one of his very rare blunders in terms of trades. But excited to see what the return is. Excited for a new chapter. It would be tough to see Chychrun go, but honestly, this would be a rare time where I would cheer for the team he goes to and watch their playoff games, because I want to see how this guy is in the playoffs. We saw a little bit of him against the Avalanche, but the Avalanche just dominated the Coyotes for like 5 games. But to see this competitiveness and this eagerness to play on a playoff team actually come out and see how he plays, see that emotion on the ice, see that hard work ethic that he always brings, it would be great to watch. And I think any team would love to have him for 3 playoff pushes for the next 3 years. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, spread the word. And as always, thank you for your support.